Hi, this is Rachel Cassidy with the Utah Division of Drinking Water. I'm in the rules section, and this presentation is the rules update. The main purpose of this presentation is to help water operators become certified, but you can also watch these presentations and take a short quiz at the end to increase your CEUs. So this is the first section, the first part of these rules update presentations. Let's jump in and learn what we can. Okay, so the Utah Division of Drinking Water, which in this presentation is going to be referred to as DDW, so just get used to that acronym. But our offices, our division is governed by a 9-member board, and the thing that you need to know about the board is that they establish our rules. At the Division of Drinking Water, we have 5 sections. The first section is the Administrative Services section, and they also are in charge of our source protection plans. So if you have questions concerning source protection, that's the section that you direct your phone call to. We have our rules section. That's the section that I'm in. We're in charge of compliance with the rules and regs, sampling, monitoring, and quality. The engineering section, you deal with them when you're working on a project, you're upgrading facilities, you need plan approval and operating permits. Construction assistance section, they deal with our funding. So if you are in need of a loan for a project, those are the people that you need to contact. And then finally, our field services section, that's the section that helps us out with our sanitary surveys. And they are also the people that you will deal with if you have questions about cross connection or if you have an emergency. And as you know, our website is drinkingwater.utah.gov. I know that you know that, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this presentation from the website. Okay, so our offices, we are in charge of regulating public drinking water systems, and we have a very specific definition of what a public drinking water system is. And you need to know this, especially if you're going to take the exam. A public water system is a system that has at least 15 service connections and or serves at least 25 people or 8 service connections for 60 days out of the year. The parts in red as we go through this presentation, if the writing is in red, that means that it has been known to be a question on the exam. So if you are using this presentation to prepare for the exam, I suggest that you highlight that or make a note of anything that you see in red. Those items are particularly important for the OpCert exam takers. So anyway, make sure with this definition that you understand that it's and or. So you can have one house, but if that house has 25 or more people in it, then that house would be a public water system. So once a system is defined as a public system, we further categorize it into one of 3 systems. It can be either a community system, a non-transient non-community system, or a transient non-community system. So if you're a public system, then you belong into one of these 3 bottom categories. So let's go over these categories and talk about what they are. A community system serves year-round residents, and what I would remember about a community system is that they have the most strict or stringent sampling requirements. And the reason for that is because the people are drinking this water year-round. They're using it for food preparation as well as for drinking. They're making bottles with it. People with compromised immune systems are drinking this water in their homes, and they're getting long-term day-in, day-out exposure. So because of that, their sampling requirements are the most strict, the most stringent of all of the different 3 types of public water systems. Some examples are municipalities, districts, the town where you live. The second type is a non-transient, non-community system. These systems, they serve the same people for at least 6 months out of the year, but they're not residential. So examples would be like a place of industry, a place of business where you go work there. They have their own water system, but you don't live there. Rural schools, things like that. So the sampling for these systems is not as stringent as the sampling for community systems, but it still is pretty intense. Really, the only sampling requirement that they don't have is radionuclides. So And they also do not have to do a consumer confidence report, although many do. So then the third type is a transient non-community system. These systems serve a transient population. The people don't live there, they're just stopping through. So like a rest stop or a restaurant, campgrounds, churches. Typically, they are not active year-round. And because of this short-term exposure, these systems have the least stringent sampling requirements of all of our public water systems. So in this presentation, we're going to go through in detail all of these public water system requirements. We're going to talk about construction standards, O&M requirements briefly, the surface water treatment rule, sanitary surveys. Those are inspections when staff from local county health departments or the Division of Drinking Water come out and inspect your water system. Cross connection, source protection, your sampling, which is the monitoring and reporting, which is related to your water quality, public notice, and then finally operator certification. One thing to keep in mind as we go through from here on out is that private systems are not regulated by the Division of Drinking Water. So if you do just have one small well for a resident, and this one connection has less than 25 people living there, that would be considered by our offices to be a private system, and they do not fall under our umbrella of regulation. So let's start off with construction standards. Obviously, the purpose of construction standards is so that you're providing a safe and reliable supply of drinking water, and that's in red because that's been known to be a question on the exam. All of our construction standards apply to when you're developing a new source, you're adding water treatment, you're changing water quantity, you're adding storage, you're adding pump stations, you're changing pressures and distribution system lines. So whenever you're doing any of these, you have to submit your plans for the project to the Division of Drinking Water for engineering review. And then you have to get a permit to do the construction, and then a permit once the construction is finished to place it in service. This last bullet here, you're going to see this again, and it's in red everywhere we see it in this presentation. So hopefully you'll remember it because we talk about it a few times, and that is that if you have a free-flowing well, that it has to be controlled by a valve. That's a construction standard that we obviously want you to know and love. So this is just an example of some construction standards. This is a gaseous chlorination building, and according to the standards, the air intake has to be at the top and an exhaust near the floor so that there's a circulation, and then an ammonia bottle is required in case of emergencies. Here's some other examples. Every source, storage, transmission lines, piping, they have to be properly sized to meet the demands of your system. And then something else that we want you to remember for the operator certification exam is that water and sewer mains have to be separated by 10 feet of horizontal distance, and the water mains have to be 18 inches above the sewer lines. And there it is again, flowing wells have to be controlled by a valve. Hopefully you didn't forget it from 30 seconds ago. Storage access lids have to be locked, and then we're going to talk a bit more in detail about those lids in a minute here. And one thing I want you to remember from this slide, especially for the exam, is that air vents have to have a number 14 mesh screen, and then any water outlet, that's like a drain or an overflow, has to at least have a number 4 mesh screen on it. So remember, the number 4 is for the drains and overflows. The number 14 is for air vents. Promise me you won't forget that. Okay, some more examples. A finished water storage tank has to be covered. Hopefully that's common sense. Here we go again with the sewer lines. Sewer lines must be at least 50 feet from a storage tank, but they also, again, 10 horizontal feet from water lines, and the sewer lines have to be 18 inches below the water mains. If you have a pumping station, your pumping station has to have 2 complete pumps, and each pump must be able to provide the maximum flow of the station. So you've got to back up. Here we are with the lids. Anytime you have an access lid for a tank or for a spring, these are very specific, and you'll need to remember these if you're taking the test. That is, that the hatch lids have to be a shoebox type lid, so they have to be wrapping over, and that overlap has to be a minimum of 2 inches. And then inside the lid, between the lid and the frame of the tank, you have to have a gasket so that you have a tight seal. Pressure, this is important to remember. For a public water system that was approved before January 1st, 2007, you have to maintain 20 psi minimum dynamic pressure at every location during normal operation. But then you also have to meet the new minimum pressures in any new service areas. So when we say new, we mean created since January 1st, 2007. So for new construction after January 1st, 2007, these are the pressure requirements. You have to have 20 psi with fire flow during peak day demand, 30 psi is during peak instantaneous demand, and 40 psi is during peak day demand. Those numbers are important to memorize. I would definitely have that cemented into my brain for the test. And then another important thing about pressure is that individual home booster pumps are not allowed unless you receive an exception granted by the division director. So let's talk about exceptions for a minute. If you have a facility that meets the intent of the rule, but it can't possibly meet the construction standards, then what you have to do is you submit a request for an exception to the Division of Drinking Water. And what this has to include, it needs to include, you have to cite the rule, you have to explain why the rule can't be met, and what you propose in space of the rule, and then also your justification for doing this. So you submit that to the Division of Drinking Water, and then you get correspondence back saying, yes, this is approved, or no, it's not, as an exception to the rule. So plan review. Plan review is required anytime you're constructing, adding, or modifying your facilities on your drinking water system. Some examples are here. This is a picture of getting a tank recoated, or another example would be if you're changing or adding some of your chemicals. If you're redeveloping a source, you're adding a pump, you're changing pressure, you're adding treatment. Any of these things, you have to have plan review. And there is no construction until that plan review approval is issued. So here's how the process works. You submit a project notification form along with your plans and specifications in order to get the plan approval. And this, you have to allow our offices, our engineers need at least 30 days to review your information. And then you get a letter from them saying your plan has been approved, you can now begin construction. Then you begin construction, you complete construction, and then before you place that into service, you have to come to the Division of Drinking Water and obtain an operating permit before that facility goes into service. If you do not get an operating permit for your facility that is in use, we will assess as many deficiency points or demerit points against your system as needed to make it a non-approved system. It's typically 50 to 150 demerit points. So part of the operating permit is you're submitting as-built drawings, and you also get a satisfactory coliform bacteria result so that we're assured that it was built to specs and that it's clean and safe to go and be part of your water supply. So obviously we can't go through that process for every single little thing that you need to do to take care of your system. So keep in mind that plan review is not required for certain O&M procedures, and here's a list for you. Like if you have to repair a leaky pipeline or replace existing pipeline that is exactly the same size, or you're upgrading to meet the minimum size requirement. This third bullet is important. Anytime you're adding new pipeline that's less than 500 feet at a time or less than 1,000 feet per year, you do not need plan approval for that. Also, if you're inspecting, cleaning, or maintaining a tank, if you're tapping into existing water mains to connect to a new service lateral, or if you're just replacing a pump of the exact same type, size, and rated capacity, these items you would not need plan approval for. But I always say, if you have questions about whether or not you should get plan approval, just please call our main office and ask to speak with any of the engineers who might be available. Okay, so let's talk about some operational requirements. Obviously, anytime you have a contaminated facility, you have to disinfect it before it's put back into service. We use the American Water Works Association disinfection standards, and those standards are listed here. You should definitely have a copy of these standards. If you don't, you can contact our office and we'll get you one. The AWWA website is awwa.org.org. Something that is also important to know is that anytime you add chemicals to your water supply, those chemicals have to meet the NSF standard 60. And something that's good to remember if you're taking the operator certification exam, and that is that NSF stands for National Sanitation Foundation. And then this last bullet is in red because it's been known to be a question on the exam, and that is if you have a spring collection area with deep-rooted vegetation, that deep-rooted vegetation must be mechanically cleaned. It's important to remember for the test. Well, and also if you have a spring collection area. Okay, so the surface water treatment rule. Anytime you have surface water, that water must be treated in order to be used for a public water supply. Chlorination alone doesn't do the job for treating surface water. It's important to remember or to know that if you have a surface water package plant for your treatment plant, that package plant must meet the same construction standards as a large plant. All surface water sources must be monitored for either crypto or E. coli before treatment to determine if you need additional treatment. And then it's important for the test, and if you have filters, to remember that the maximum filter loading rate is 6 gallons per minute per feet squared. Okay, turbidity. Turbidity is sort of a measurement of the cloudiness of the water. Turbid particles have a charge on them that attracts the nasty bugs like Cryptosporidium and Giardia. Turbidity is sort of their taxi cab. It's their way for getting around. And so the more turbid your water is, the more likely it is that that water contains those bad bugs that can make everybody really sick. So we use it kind of as an indicator almost. And turbidity is very specific with our surface water systems. It must be 0.34 NTU in 95% of the samples, and it can never exceed a 1.0 NTU spike. NTU stands for nephelometric turbidity unit, and it's just the units that are used to measure turbidity. So every filter has to have the turbidity measured at the effluent, and then when all your filters combine, the combined filter turbidity has to be measured at the clear well. So that's your surface water turbidity. Now groundwater, we also have a turbidity standard for that, and that is 5.0 NTU. So if you're a surface water system, you're measuring the turbidity, you're also measuring the quantity of the water and the chemicals that you're adding. All of these items are put on a report that's submitted to our offices on a monthly basis. Please, if you're taking the exam, remember that this is a monthly requirement. Okay, so disinfection. If you're adding a disinfectant, we require contact time. And these 3 contact times are important to remember for the exam. And that is, if you're inactivating Cryptosporidium, you have to have a 2-log inactivation, which is 99%. If you're inactivating Giardia lamblia, that's a 3-log inactivation, which is 99.9% inactivation. And then enteric viruses, you need a 4-log inactivation, which is 99.99% inactivation. Contact time is a measurement of the concentration of the disinfectant multiplied by the contact time. The chlorine residual leaving the plant has to be equal to or greater than 0.2 milligrams per liter, and that residual has to be measurable throughout the system. You cannot have no residual. Once you've added your disinfectant, you have to maintain that residual for chlorine. Adequate disinfection is mandatory before the first customer, so you can't wait for your contact time to occur after you've been serving the water to your customers. So contact time with mixing basins and storage tanks is determined by tracer studies or the equivalent, and if you have questions on that or need help with that, please contact our engineering section. So surface water supposed to be super obvious. It's on the surface of the earth. So, but there are cases where groundwater is influenced and under the direct influence of surface water, and we call this UDI. When a groundwater source has been determined to be UDI, then we require surface water treatment for those sources. We treat them exactly as the same as we treat our surface water sources. So UDI is determined through a filter test that's called an MPA test. MPA stands for microscopic particulate analysis. And this filter, the effluent of the source is run through this filter for about 6 hours or so. And then the filter is shipped off to a lab, and they cut it up and analyze it and look for any of the bugs that are typically present in surface water sources. And then we combine that with observations about the temperature, the turbidity, the alkalinity, the volume, and the geologic conditions of the source. And we use all of that information to determine whether or not a surface is UDI. Once a source is UDI, again, they have to do complete surface water treatment. Okay, so this next section is the improvement priority system. The improvement priority system is specific to the state of Utah. It's been in effect in Utah since 1996, and the purpose of it is to give you and us an idea of how your system is doing in compliance with all of our rules and regulations. How is it doing on a whole? So it's like golf. The more points you have, the worse off you are. And we assess points based on, is the water system taking their samples? Are they notifying the public when required? Are there physical deficiencies? Do they have a certified operator if it's required? Do they have a cross-connection control program and source protection plan in place? So points are assessed for deficiencies and violations. Deficiencies are found at the time of the sanitary survey or any inspection that we might be present at. An example of a deficiency would be if during your sanitary survey, which by the way, those happen every 3 years, during your sanitary survey, if they see that you don't have the number 14 mesh screen on your air vent, that would be a deficiency and you would be assigned points. Those points would go against on your IPS report, your Improvement Priority System report. It's important to know that the amount of points that we assess is based on the threat to the water quality and public health. So if you have confirmed fecal contamination, which is a boil order, that's going to be 50 points, which is a lot of points. But if you're just missing a smooth nose sampling tap on your well discharge piping, that's just 1 point. So we have thresholds. You have so many points you can get before your water system becomes not approved. If you're a community system, you have to have less than 150 improvement priority system points. If you're a non-transient non-community system, you have to have less than 120 points. And for a transient non-community system, you have to have less than 100 points. So if you have less than the threshold according to your system type, then you will have an approved rating. There's also not approved. If you go over, you will be rated not approved. And then this this golden corrective action rating, that is a provisional rating that means that the system is working on compliance. It means that typically the system became not approved, but then they came to our offices and they said, look, in order to get rid of this deficiency, it's going to take time and money. Here's how we're going to do it. Here's our plan. And then we'll rate that system corrective action until they get their items fixed. So points are added and deleted at the time of the sanitary survey, or also when the water system fails to sample, or they do sample and there's a quality problem. So when the physical deficiencies are fixed, you take a picture and you fill out a form and send it to our offices, and then we take those deficiency points off of your IPS report. When you fail to take a chemical sample, you just take that sample, send us the results, and we'll get rid of the points, except for coliform bacteria. For coliform bacteria, the IPS points stay on for 12 months or 4 consecutive quarters of operation. So those points are really hard to get rid of, and the moral of that story is don't forget to take your coliform bacteria samples. Or if you have questions on how many to take and when, please call us, because it's better that we talk you through it than it is to guess and then possibly get demerit points. So at the time of your sanitary survey, points are given for a physical facility deficiency, but those points aren't effective right away. We will give you a time period for that problem to be fixed before the points are activated. And then points are only given once for a repeating deficiency. So if you have 5 air vents at 5 different locations where there's no number 14 mesh screen, we will just assess the points one time, but then those points won't come off until those 5 are completely fixed and we get your verification. Some deficiencies can be grandfathered if we are assured that those deficiencies will not impact public health, and the way to do that is to get an exception, and we talked about exceptions earlier in this presentation.